I grew up in the post-war period in a general climate of optimism. I mean, people were faced with the threat of nuclear death, and we were protesting against the war in Vietnam, and we were protesting against apartheid in South Africa, and we were fighting for women to be treated in a reasonable way. But we were doing that from a position of optimism because we really thought we could do it. We thought we had the power, actually, to change things. I mean, the biggest change in my lifetime has been, I don't see that anymore. People are pessimistic now. People don't have the energy to protest. They feel as if the forces that are up against them are bigger than they are, and there's not much they can do about it. And they retreat inward. We've had a resurgence of nationalism in the last 20 years that's quite terrifying, because nations have also gone back into themselves. So the prospect of change and action has become much more remote. That's a really big change that happened. 70% of animals, birds, insects and fish have died in the last 50 years. When I grew up, there was a lot more life on the planet. There was a lot more biodiversity. It's not that we've lost some birds and some animals. We've lost 70%. That's also scary. When I was young, we had a population of about 2 billion, if I remember rightly. It's now nearly 8 billion. Planet can't really support that number of people. And nobody will talk about this because this is one of the many subjects which one mustn't speak about. So thinking has been replaced by politically correct thinking. In other words, not saying what's really happening, but saying what it's permissible to say. So these are, I think, really not small, but very large changes in a very short time. So an historic / geological scale, this is a catastrophe. I've lived, lucky or unlucky, I've lived through a catastrophe because the world has really changed. The threat of nuclear destruction, which is what concerned us, my generation, it was real, and it would have caused significant damage to the planet and killed an awful lot of people. But it seemed more survivable than this kind of silent threat now of planetary change on a scale that will no longer support human life. The planet will be fine. We don't, people talk about this as if the planet's in trouble. Planet's not in trouble. It's like me having a flu. The planet's been invaded by a virus, that's us, and the virus is damaging the planet. The planet will get rid of the virus in the end and survive, but it'll be cockroaches or something else that comes after us. So, that's the long answer. The short answer is, I think the need for action has grown, but the will to action has declined in my lifetime. I remember how I felt in the 60s. We felt like we could do anything. We lived in a futuristic world where science fiction was showing everything was going to be better and faster and more, make our lives better. Science fiction is dystopian now. It's all dystopian. It's going to make our lives worse. We're going to be living in a Blade Runner world of decaying modernity and bad weather. My generation's not going to change the world. This is up to young people. they have to do it. I generally don't see them doing it in our part of the world. I do not see people on the streets. I see situations in British society which are much worse than they were in the 60s and the 70s. Because in the 60s and the 70s, Britain had just had a welfare state. Education was free, health care was free, you got paid if you were off work, you got paid if you were sick, we had good pension, things worked. This is no longer the case. But we were on the street protesting about wars in other countries and racial discrimination in other countries and the general threat of nuclear destruction which affected everybody. But now people are living difficult lives and they're not on the streets. I don't see it. I wish I did, but I don't see it. I think art belongs in a different realm. Okay, all the realms intersect because we're human beings and we live on a planet and we live under certain conditions and they all affect one another. But I don't think music does. I mean, I think if you want to sing songs about ecology, that's fine. But if you want to be Webern and be very dry and academic with your music, that's also fine, because aesthetics speaks to a different aspect of human life. And I think the job of an artist is to present work that's stimulating, work that makes people's lives more interesting or better if they're interested. I mean, some people will look at Kandinsky and just say, my 3-year-old can do that. Some people will look at Kandinsky and think it's brilliant and will get some kind of pleasure out of it. Artists can only speak to the people who get pleasure from what they do. Otherwise, you're in the pop business of trying to find out what will please people and do that, which is why everybody eats such terrible food now, because food companies say, what is it that addicts people to certain kinds of food? Oh, lots of sugar, lots of salt, lots of this, lots of that. So we make our food with that, and then we will sell a lot of it. So if your reason for being in the art world is to make money, the sensible thing to do is to find out what people want and give them that. If you're in an intellectual community and you're sharing different ways of looking at the world and how it is, then essentially you're part of a conversation and you have to follow the conversation. And the conversation is based on what happened before. So if you grow up with, as I did, with John Coltrane and Stockhausen, and then in the background Beethoven and Bach, and those people have established the language, and it's your job really to take the language forward into the present, because there's no point in writing music like Beethoven anymore, because not only has it been done, it's been done better, because the people who make the great breakthroughs in art usually are the people who do it best. You know, nobody ever surpassed Bach when it came to equal tuning, which was a relatively new thing in his time, that you could move from any key to any other key. The pioneers, because the energy that's required to break through into new thinking, that takes a lot, because you have to think something that hasn't been thought before. To copy that idea, and possibly to try and improve it, or to elaborate on it and find the other dimensions to it, it's worth doing and it's worthy, but it doesn't take quite so much work as actually breaking through. So You know, I think you'll find it's always the people in the minority in the avant-garde field who are making proposals, who are making their propositions about how the language can progress and change. And if the next generation pick up on what you've done, then that's worked. Then you're part of the history. If they don't pick up on it because your experiment didn't really work, or because that wasn't a direction people wanted to take, so be it. But I don't think you can know that when you're doing work. You have to do work as if people will take it seriously.